What would you do if the man who destroyed your family when you were 9 years old walked into a courtroom 23 years later and you were the one holding the gavel? That's exactly what happened to Kennedy Brooks. But here's the part that'll blow your mind. When she confronted him, when she reminded him of the day he evicted her family and laughed while they packed their lives into garbage bags, he didn't even remember her. She was that forgettable to him, that meaningless. But she remembered everything, every detail, every moment. And she'd spent 23 years making sure that when they met again, he'd have no choice but to see her. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about what happens when a powerless child becomes a powerful woman, when the system that crushed you becomes the weapon you use for justice. If you're new to Topcore, hit that subscribe button right now, because we tell the real stories, the uncomfortable ones, the ones that show you exactly how America works and how people fight back. Let me take you back to where it all started, to a 9-year-old girl standing on a porch watching her world end. Kennedy Brooks was 9 years old the day she learned that being right didn't matter. It was a Tuesday morning in March, cold enough that she could see her breath when she stood on the porch. The house on Maple Street wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, creaky floors, a water heater that only worked when it felt like it. But it was home, the only home Kennedy had ever known. Her mother, Diane, stood in the doorway holding a cardboard box filled with their kitchen dishes. Her face looked like stone. That's what it did when she was trying not to cry in front of Kennedy and her little brother Marcus, who was only 6. "Mama, where are we going?" Marcus asked for the 4th time that morning. "Somewhere safe, baby. Don't worry." But Kennedy saw the lie in her mother's eyes. There was nowhere safe. Not anymore. The eviction notice had come 30 days ago. Rent increase, 40%. Just like that. No warning, no room to negotiate. The landlord's company, Hartwell Properties, had been buying up houses in their neighborhood for the past year. Old families, black families who'd lived there for generations, were being pushed out one by one. Diane worked 2 jobs. Morning shift at a nursing home, wiping old people who couldn't wipe themselves. Evening shift cleaning offices downtown, scrubbing toilets for people who made more in a day than she made in a month. She tried to negotiate with the property company, tried to explain that she couldn't afford a 40% increase, tried to ask for time to find something cheaper. The response came on legal letterhead. Failure to pay the increased rent will result in immediate eviction proceedings. Now 3 men in cheap suits stood on their lawn with a sheriff's deputy, watching the Brooks family pack their lives into garbage bags and cardboard boxes. Kennedy recognized one of the men. Tall, white, wearing a watch that caught the sunlight. She'd seen him before, driving through their neighborhood in a black Mercedes, looking at things like people look at things in stores they're thinking about buying. His name was Clayton Hartwell. She'd heard the adults talking about him. He owned the company. He owned everything now. "You have 30 minutes to remove your belongings," the deputy said. He looked uncomfortable, like he didn't want to be there but had a job to do and bills to pay just like. Diane nodded and went back inside. Kennedy stood on that porch with her worn backpack slung over one shoulder and stared at Clayton Hartwell. He was on his phone, laughing about something, like this was just another Tuesday morning. Like watching a family lose everything meant absolutely nothing. He caught her staring. His smile faded for just a second. Their eyes met. Kennedy didn't look away. She was 9 years old, but she wasn't stupid. She understood what was happening here. Understood it was wrong. Understood that men like him could destroy people's lives and never face a single consequence. Diane nodded and went back inside. Kennedy stood on that porch with her worn backpack slung over one shoulder and stared at Clayton Hartwell. He was on his phone, laughing about something, like this was just another Tuesday morning. Like watching a family lose everything meant absolutely nothing. He caught her staring. His smile faded for just a second. Their eyes met. Kennedy didn't look away. She was 9 years old, but she wasn't stupid. She understood what was happening here. Understood it was wrong. understood that men like him could destroy people's lives and never face a single consequence. "Kennedy, come help me with your brother's things," Diane called from inside. Kennedy turned and walked back into the house, but she burned that face into her memory. Clayton Hartwell, the man who thought people were disposable. 30 minutes later, everything the Brooks family owned sat on the curb in garbage bags and boxes. Diane's car, a 1998 Honda Civic with over 200,000 miles on it, was packed so full they could barely see out the back window. "Where are we going, Mama?" Kennedy asked quietly. "Your Aunt Renee's place, in Chicago. She says we can stay with her until I find work there." Chicago, 600 miles away. Away from Kennedy's school, her teachers who said she was gifted, her friends, everything she knew. Marcus started crying. Diane pulled him close, but her face stayed stone. Kennedy looked back at the house one last time. Clayton Hartwell was still standing there, watching as a work crew started boarding up the windows. He said something to one of the men in suits and laughed again. That laugh, Kennedy would remember that laugh for the rest of her life. She made a promise to herself right there on that curb, surrounded by garbage bags that held everything her family owned. A promise that would take years to keep. A promise she would never break. Someday, she would matter. Someday, men like Clayton Hartwell would have to see her, would have to know her name, would have to answer for what they did. Someday, she would make sure no other little girl had to watch her mother's face turn to stone while packing dishes into cardboard boxes. No other child would have to stand on a porch while rich men laughed. Kennedy didn't know how yet, didn't know when, but she knew it would happen. Because she was smart. Everyone said so. And if being smart meant anything at all, it meant she could figure out how to fight back. The Honda's engine started with a cough. Diane put it in drive. As they pulled away, Kennedy turned in her seat and looked back one more time. Clayton Hartwell had already gone into his Mercedes, already moved on to whatever came next in his day, already forgotten about them. But Kennedy would never forget him. 23 years later, that promise would come due, and Clayton Hartwell would learn something he should have known all along. The people you step on while climbing up might be waiting for you at the top. Chicago was cold in ways Kennedy hadn't expected. Not just the weather, though that hit like a slap every time she walked outside, but cold in the way people looked through you on the street like you were made of glass. Cold in the cramped spaces and the way 3 extra people made everything harder for everyone. Aunt Renee lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in Inglewood. She worked nights at a hospital, something with bedpans and blood that she never talked about, and did hair during the day in her living room. She'd made space for them without being asked, gave up her bedroom, started sleeping on the couch, never once complained out loud. But I knew they were a burden. Knew that 3 extra bodies in a 1-bedroom apartment stretched everything. Food, hot water, patience, love, to the breaking point. Diane found work within 2 weeks. 2 jobs, just like before. Morning shift at a different nursing home, evening shift at a grocery store stocking shelves and running register. She left at 5 in the morning and got home after 11 at night. Kennedy became the parent. At 9 years old, she got Marcus ready for school, made sure he ate breakfast, usually cereal or toast, whatever Aunt Renee had in the cabinets, walked him to the bus stop 6 blocks away, holding his hand tight because Inglewood wasn't like their old neighborhood. Got on her own bus, went to her own school. Came home. Helped Marcus with his homework at the kitchen table, while Aunt Renee did someone's hair in the corner. Made dinner from whatever was in the fridge, usually pasta or rice with whatever could stretch. Put Marcus to bed on the air mattress they shared in Aunt Renee's bedroom. Then Kennedy did her own homework by the light of a desk lamp, trying not to wake Marcus sleeping 2 feet away. Sometimes the electricity got shut off when money was tight. Those nights she used a flashlight Aunt Renee kept for emergencies. Kennedy's new school noticed she was different.
The teacher saw it first. "Kennedy, can you stay after class for a minute?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked one afternoon. She was the fifth-grade teacher, young, with kind eyes that
Kennedy stayed. "I've been reviewing your work," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "Your reading comprehension tests, your math scores. Kennedy, you're reading at an 8th grade level. Your math is even higher. Have you ever heard of the Magnet School program?" "No, ma'am." "It's a public school, so it's free, but it's competitive. The academics are much more advanced. The students there go on to top high schools, top colleges. You'd have to test in, but I think you could do it." Kennedy took the information packet home. Diane looked at it that night while eating the spaghetti Kennedy had made. Noodles and sauce from a jar. Nothing fancy. "Baby, this is incredible," Diane said. Her voice was tired. Always tired now. "But look at this. The school is on the north side. That's over an hour each way on the train. And it says here you'd need access to a computer for some of the coursework. I can use the computers at the library," Kennedy said, "and I don't mind the commute." "You're 9 years old. You shouldn't have to commute anywhere. You should be playing with friends, being a kid." "I'm fine, Mama." But Kennedy wasn't fine. She was angry. Angry at Clayton Hartwell for taking their home. Angry at a system that let families get thrown out while rich men laughed. Angry at having to be 9 years old going on 30 because the world didn't care about little black girls whose families got evicted. She took the test for Northside Academic Prep on a Saturday morning. 2 hours of reading comprehension, math problems, logic puzzles. Kennedy finished early. 3 weeks later, the letter came. She'd scored in the 99th percentile. She was in. The commute was brutal. Kennedy woke up at 5 in the morning, same time as her mama now, got Marcus ready, caught the 6:30 bus, transferred to the Red Line train, then the Brown Line, arrived at Northside Prep by 8 in the morning. She did homework on the trains, read books while standing because the trains were always crowded, ate lunch alone at school because she couldn't afford to go out with the other kids who had money for pizza places and coffee shops. After school, she reversed the commute. Picked up Marcus from after-school care, made dinner, helped with his homework, did her own homework until midnight. Every single day. For 4 years. At 13, Kennedy had perfect grades, perfect attendance, perfect test scores on every standardized test to stay through at her. She also had exactly 0 friends. No time for sleepovers or birthday parties or any of the normal things teenagers did. No time to be a child. The kids at Northside Prep were different from her. Wealthy, mostly. White and Asian kids whose parents were doctors, lawyers, and professors. They talked about college like it was guaranteed, like success was something you just inherited along with your last name. Kennedy knew nothing was guaranteed. Kennedy knew you had to take it. She applied for every scholarship she could find, spent her few free hours writing essays about overcoming adversity, about being evicted, about watching her mother work herself to exhaustion, about raising her little brother while trying to get an education. At 14, she won a full scholarship to Phillips Exeter Academy, one of the most elite boarding schools in the entire country. In New Hampshire, a whole different world. "I can't let you go," Diane said when the acceptance letter came. She was crying, actually crying, which Diane never did. "You're too young, and Marcus needs you. I need you." "Mama, this is my shot, our shot. If I go to Exeter, I can get into any college in America. I can get a degree that actually means something, get a real job, help you, help Marcus, help all of us." "You're 14 years old, baby. You're supposed to need me, not the other way around." Kennedy looked at her mother, at the exhaustion carved into her face, at the hands worn rough from cleaning chemicals and hospital work. "You gave me everything, Mama. Now let me give something back." Diane cried for 3 days. Then she went to Goodwill and bought Kennedy the nicest clothes they could afford for a girl going to a school where other kids showed up with designer luggage. At the airport, Diane held Kennedy so tight it hurt. She whispered, "Make them remember your name. Make them see you. Make them know you matter." Kennedy promised she would. The plane took off. Kennedy watched Chicago disappear below her, watched the only world she'd ever known become small and distant. She was 14 years old, flying alone to a boarding school where she'd be one of maybe 3 black students,
where kids had trust funds bigger than her mama's lifetime earnings. Kennedy wasn't scared. She was ready. Because somewhere out there, Clayton Hartwell was still laughing, still destroying families, still thinking people like Kennedy didn't matter. But he was wrong. And someday soon, she was going to prove it. Phillips Exeter Academy looked like something out of a movie about rich people. Historic brick buildings covered in ivy, lawns so perfect they looked fake, students walking around in expensive clothes like they owned the world. And maybe they did. Maybe that's what $60,000 a year tuition bought you, the feeling that you owned whatever space you walked into. Kennedy arrived with a suitcase from Goodwill and clothes her mama had picked out at thrift stores. She was one of 3 black students in her entire freshman class. What if maybe a dozen scholarship kids total in a sea of teenagers whose parents were CEOs and senators and people who had buildings named after them? She felt every stare. "That's the girl from Chicago," someone whispered in the hallway. "The one who wrote about being evicted in her essay. Affirmative action case, probably." "I heard she's supposed to be really smart, though." Kennedy kept walking, didn't have time to care what they thought, didn't have energy to waste on people who'd never had to worry about where they'd sleep or what they'd eat. She was there for one reason: to be so good they couldn't ignore her. Advanced placement biology, advanced placement chemistry, advanced placement calculus, advanced placement literature, advanced placement history. If it was the hardest version of a class, Kennedy took it. Finished her freshman year with a perfect 4.0 grade point average. Sophomore year, she joined the debate team. Turned out she was good at arguing. Really good. Maybe it came from years of having to advocate for herself, for Marcus, for her mama. Maybe it came from being angry and finally having a place to put all that rage. She won the regional championship, then the state championship. By junior year, she was team captain. But Kennedy didn't stop there. Junior year, she started a nonprofit organization, called it Home Matters, raised money to help families facing eviction, worked with legal aid organizations to connect people with lawyers who could fight for them, spoke at conferences about housing inequality, about how the system was designed to push poor people, especially poor black people, out of their homes. She used her own story, used the pain, used the memory of packing garbage bags while Clayton Hartwell laughed. By senior year, Kennedy Brooks was the most accomplished student in her graduating class. Valedictorian, National Merit Scholar, early admission to Harvard University with a full scholarship. She'd done it. Climbed out of that eviction, out of that one-bedroom apartment in Inglewood, out of poverty itself through nothing but intelligence and will. But she never forgot Clayton Hartwell's face. Never let herself forget the promise she'd made standing on that curb. Harvard was where Kennedy learned about power. Not the kind of power that came from money or connections. The kind that came from understanding how systems worked, how laws worked, how you could use the very structures that crush people to protect them instead. She chose Harvard Law School deliberately because law was power. Law was the ability to fight back against people like Clayton Hartwell who thought they could destroy lives without consequences. She graduated top of her class. Every professor wanted her to clerk for them, to join their firms, to be their protege. Kennedy chose a federal judge. Spent 2 years learning how the court system actually worked from the inside. Then she joined one of the most prestigious civil rights law firms in New York City. She was 25 years old and making more money than her mama had made in her entire life. At 28, Kennedy made partner, youngest in the firm's 150-year history. The senior partners tried to hide their shock, but she saw it. A black woman from Inglewood making partner before she turned 30? That wasn't supposed to happen, but it did. At 30, Kennedy argued her first case before the Supreme Court of the United States. Housing discrimination case. Family of 4 evicted from their home through fabricated lease violations. The property owner wanted to flip the building to luxury condos. Kennedy stood in front of 9 justices and argued that housing wasn't just business. It was life.
It was dignity. It was the foundation everything else was built on. She won, 7-2. The case made national news. Rising star attorney wins landmark housing rights case. Kennedy's face was on the front page of the New York Times. Diane called her crying. "Baby, I'm so proud of you. Your daddy would be so proud." Kennedy's father had died when she was 7, before the eviction, before Chicago, before everything fell apart. Sometimes she wondered what he'd think of who she'd become. At 32, Kennedy received a call from the New York State Attorney General's office. "We'd like to offer you a position as Deputy Attorney General. You'd be overseeing housing and tenant rights enforcement across the entire state." Kennedy didn't hesitate. "I accept." Because this was it. This was the position she'd been working toward without even knowing it. Deputy Attorney General meant power, real power. The power to investigate, the power to prosecute, the power to hold people accountable. The power to go after landlords who destroyed families. Her first day on the job, Kennedy walked into an office with her name on the door. Windows overlooking Manhattan. A staff of 12 lawyers working under her direction. She'd made it. From a 9-year-old packing garbage bags to this, from powerless to powerful. But Kennedy hadn't forgotten, would never forget. On a Thursday afternoon, 3 months into her new position, her assistant knocked on the door. "We have a major case I think you should see," he said. "Housing discrimination investigation. Been going on for a while. The evidence is pretty damning." He handed her a file folder. Kennedy opened it, started reading. Property management company systematically targeting low-income tenants. Primarily people of color, raising rents to levels they couldn't afford, then evicting them when they couldn't pay. Sometimes fabricating violations just to have cause for eviction. It had been going on for 15 years, over 2,000 families affected. Kennedy kept reading. Her hands started shaking before she knew why. Then she saw the company name at the top of the page. Hartwell Properties, LLC. CEO, Clayton Hartwell. Kennedy stopped breathing. 23 years. 23 years since that March morning on Maple Street. 23 years since she'd watched the man laugh on his phone while her family lost everything. She looked at the file in her hands, at the evidence, at the violations, at the pattern of destruction that had continued for over 2 decades. Clayton Hartwell had kept going. Kept evicting families, kept destroying lives, kept laughing all the way to the bank. But now Kennedy had something she didn't have at 9 years old. She had power. She had evidence. She had the authority to make him answer for what he'd done. Kennedy picked up her phone and called her lead investigator. "The Hartwell Properties case," she said. Her voice was steady, cold. "I want everything, every document, every deposition, every piece of evidence you have, and I want it on my desk by tomorrow morning." "Are you taking point on this one personally?" Kennedy looked at the file, at the name that had haunted her for 23 years. "Yes. I'm taking it personally." Kennedy didn't sleep that night. She sat in her apartment, a nice place in Brooklyn, nothing fancy but hers, actually hers, with the Hartwell Properties file spread across her dining room table. Every page was another family destroyed, another eviction notice, another rent increase that no working-class family could possibly afford. The Johnsons, the Rodriguezes, the Washingtons, the Chens, page after page of names, families, people who'd done nothing wrong except be poor in a city that was being sold to the highest bidder. Most of them were Black and Latinos. The pattern was clear if you weren't looking for it. But Kennedy was looking. Kennedy saw everything. Hartwell Properties would buy a building in a working-class neighborhood, usually somewhere that was up and coming, which was code for Black and brown people still live here, but not for long.
The evidence shows a systematic pattern of housing discrimination targeting low-income families and communities of color. Over the past 15 years, Hartwell Properties has evicted more than 2,000 families. The majority of those families were Black and Latino. The majority were working-class people who could not afford sudden, dramatic rent increases. She paused. Let that number sink in. 2,000 families. This lawsuit alleges violations of the Fair Housing Act. It alleges discriminatory practices. It alleges a pattern of behavior designed to force specific populations out of their homes for profit. A reporter raised her hand. Ms. Brooks, is it true that you were personally affected by Hartwell Properties? Kennedy had known this question was coming, had prepared for it, but actually saying the words out loud was different. Yes, she said. She looked directly at the camera. When I was 9 years old, my family was evicted by Hartwell Properties. We lived in a house on Maple Street. We'd lived there my whole life. My mother worked 2 jobs. She was never late on rent, never caused problems, never violated her lease. The room was completely silent. Then Hartwell Properties bought the building. 30 days later, they raised the rent 40%. When my mother couldn't pay, they evicted us. I watched them pack our lives into garbage bags and boxes. I watched the sheriff stand on our lawn while we lost our home. Kennedy's voice didn't shake, didn't waver. And I remember very clearly seeing the owner of the company standing there. He was on his phone, laughing about something. Like watching a family lose everything was just another Tuesday morning for him. She leaned forward. That man was Clayton Hartwell, and today, 23 years later, he's going to face justice for what he did to my family and to 2,000 other families just like mine. The room exploded, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, but Kennedy was done talking. She walked up the stage and went back to her office to prepare for war. The trial started 6 weeks later. Clayton Hartwell showed up with 5 lawyers, expensive suits, silk ties, the kind of legal team that charged $1,000 an hour and earned every penny. Kennedy's team was smaller, but they had something Clayton's lawyers didn't have. They had the truth. The trial lasted 4 months. Witnesses testified about losing their homes, about being harassed, about repairs that never got made until they complained, and then suddenly getting eviction notices. Clayton Hartwell sat at the defense table every day looking bored, like this was beneath him, like these people suffering meant nothing. Kennedy watched him, studied him, waited for any sign that he recognized her, any memory of that day on Maple Street. Nothing. Not even a flicker. She'd spent 23 years remembering his face, and he didn't even know who she was. On the final day of testimony, Kennedy called a surprise witness. The state calls Diane Brooks. The courtroom doors opened. Kennedy's mother walked in wearing the best dress Kennedy had ever bought it for Mother's Day 3 years ago with her first big paycheck. Diane was 54 now, but looked older. 23 years of working 2 jobs left marks that didn't fade. She took the stand, placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth. Kennedy approached. Miss Brooks, can you tell the court about March 15th, 23 years ago? Diane looked at the jury, then at Clayton Hartwell sitting there in his expensive suit. That was the day we got evicted, she said. Her voice was quiet but strong. From our home on Maple Street, the only home my children had ever known. What happened? Diane told the story. The rent increase, the 30-day notice, begging for more time, being told no, packing everything into garbage bags while strangers watched. Did you ever recover financially? No, she shook her head. We lived with my sister for 3 years, 3 of us in her 1-bedroom apartment. I worked 2 jobs for 15 years just to afford a small place for my kids. My son Marcus is in community college now, working full-time to pay for it because we never had savings. That eviction destroyed any stability we'd built. And how did the eviction affect your daughter Kennedy? Diane looked at Kennedy standing there in her lawyer suit, her daughter who'd become a deputy attorney general. It made her grow up overnight. She was 9 years old and suddenly she was taking care of her little brother, making dinner, doing homework by flashlight when we couldn't afford electricity. She lost her childhood because a rich man decided our home was worth more without us in it. Kennedy watched Clayton Hartwell's face, watched for recognition, for memory, for anything. His expression never changed. He didn't remember them at all. They were nothing to him, Completely forgettable. The jury looked at Diane, then at Clayton, then at evidence piled on the prosecution table. Kennedy rested her case. Now they waited. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Kennedy spent those 6 hours in a conference room down the hall from the courtroom. Couldn't eat, couldn't sit still, just paced back and forth while her legal team tried to look confident. "We got this," her lead attorney kept saying. "The evidence is overwhelming." But Kennedy knew better than to trust in overwhelming evidence. She'd seen guilty people walk free, seen innocent people convicted, seen the system work exactly as designed, protecting the powerful, crushing the vulnerable. She thought about her mama sitting in the courtroom gallery, about the 2,000 families waiting to see if justice was real or just a word people used to make themselves feel better. At 4:47, her stomach dropped. 6 hours. Was that good or bad? Too fast meant they made up their minds early. Too slow meant they were divided. 6 hours could mean anything. Kennedy walked back to the courtroom. Every seat was filled. Housing advocates, journalists, families who'd been evicted, people who'd come to see if the system could actually work for regular people instead of billionaires. Diane sat in the front row. She reached out and squeezed Kennedy's hand as she walked past. Clayton Hartwell sat at the defense table, surrounded by his lawyers. He looked annoyed, like the jury had inconvenienced him by taking this long. The judge entered. Everyone stood. "Please be seated. I understand the jury has reached the verdict." "We have, Your Honor." Kennedy's heart was beating so hard she thought everyone could hear it. The forewoman stood. She was a middle-aged black woman who had been a social worker for 30 years. During jury selection, Clayton's lawyers had tried to get her removed. Kennedy had fought to keep her. On the charge of systematic Fair Housing Act violations, how do you find the defendant? The forewoman looked directly at Clayton Hartwell. "Guilty." The courtroom erupted, people cheering, crying, the judge's gavel pounding for order. On the charge of discriminatory housing practices targeting protected classes, guilty. On the charge of tenant harassment and intimidation, guilty. Every charge. Guilty on every single one. Kennedy closed her eyes, let herself breathe for what felt like the first time in 4 months. Clayton Hartwell's face went white. His lawyers immediately started whispering to him, probably already planning appeals. The judge called for order. Took another 10 minutes to get the courtroom quiet enough to continue. The jury also returned a unanimous recommendation for damages, the judge said, in the amount of $47 million to be distributed among affected families. Additionally, the jury recommends that Mr. Hartwell be personally barred from the property management industry in the state of New York for a period of 25 years. $47 million. Kennedy did the math in her head. 2,000 families. That averaged out to over $20,000 per family. Not enough to undo the damage, not enough to give back the years and stability they lost, but something. Finally, something. The judge continued. Furthermore, I am ordering Hartwell Properties, LLC to be dissolved, all properties to be sold, with proceeds pouring to the damage fund and remaining assets to be liquidated. Mr. Hartwell, you are personally barred from operating any property management business in the state of New York for a period of 25 years. Clayton stood up. Your Honor, this is outrageous. We intend to appeal. You're welcome to appeal, Mr. Hartwell, but until that appeal is heard and decided, this verdict stands. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down. The courtroom exploded again. Kennedy was surrounded by people hugging her, congratulating her, crying tears of joy and relief. She looked for her mama, found her standing off to the side, tears streaming down her face. Kennedy pushed through the crowd and wrapped her arms around Diane. We did it, Mama. We actually did it. No, baby, you did it. You made that promise when you were 9 years old and you kept it. They held each other and cried while cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. Kennedy looked over her mama's shoulder and saw Clayton Hartwell being led out by his lawyers. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, like the verdict had physically shrunk him. Good. The press conference after the verdict was chaos. Every reporter in New York wanted a statement. Kennedy stood at the podium, her mama beside her, and tried to put into words what this meant.
This verdict isn't just about holding one man accountable, she said. It's about sending a message. Housing isn't just business. It's not just profit and loss on a spreadsheet. It's people's lives, their stability, their children's futures. A reporter shouted a question. Miss Brooks, how does it feel to win a case against the man who evicted your family? Kennedy thought about that 9-year-old girl on the porch, about garbage bags and laughter and promises made in anger and pain. It feels like justice, she said. Real justice, not revenge, justice. There's a difference. What's the difference? Revenge is about making someone hurt the way they hurt you. Justice is about making sure they can't hurt anyone else. We didn't just win money today, we shut down a system that was designed to exploit vulnerable families. That's justice. Another reporter. What message does this send to other property owners? It sends a message that there are consequences, that you can't hide behind business decisions when those decisions destroy lives, that the law exists to protect people, not just property. Kennedy looked directly at the camera. And if you're a family facing eviction right now, if you're struggling with a landlord who thinks they can push you around because you don't have money or power, I want you to know something. You matter. Your home matters. And there are people fighting for you. She stepped away from the podium. Done with questions, done with cameras. In the hallway, outside, Kennedy finally had a moment alone. She leaned against the wall and let her professional mask drop. 23 years. She'd been working toward this moment for 23 years without even knowing it. Then she saw him. Clayton Hartwell, walking toward the exit with his lawyers flanking him like bodyguards. Kennedy pushed off the wall, started walking toward him. Her mama grabbed her arm. Kennedy, don't. I have to. She crossed the hallway, stepped directly into Clayton Hartwell's path. He stopped, looked at her with no recognition in his eyes. Mr. Hartwell? Kennedy said. Her voice was calm, steady. Do you remember me? Clayton Hartwell looked at Kennedy like she was a stranger asking for directions. Should I? He said. Those two words hit Kennedy harder than the guilty verdict, harder than anything that had happened in that courtroom. He didn't remember. After everything, after ruining her family's life, after being the reason she'd lost her childhood, her home, her sense of safety in the world. She was nothing to him. Completely forgettable. Maple Street, Kennedy said. Her voice didn't shake. 23 years ago, March 15th, you evicted my family. Kennedy watched this face, watched for the moment recognition would hit. Nothing. I evicted a lot of families, Clayton said. Like that was a reasonable thing to say, like that made it better. I was 9 years old. I stood on that porch and watched you laugh on your phone while we packed our lives into garbage bags. My mother was crying. My little brother didn't understand why strangers were taking our home. And you were laughing. Something flickered in Clayton's eyes. Maybe memory.
Maybe just discomfort at being confronted. That was business, he said finally. Nothing personal. Kennedy stepped closer. She was tall, 5'9", but he was taller. She didn't care. It was personal to me. It was personal to my mother who worked 2 jobs and still couldn't afford your 40% rent increase. It was personal to the 2,000 other families you destroyed for profit. One of Clayton's lawyers touched his arm. "Mr. Hartwell, we should go." "No," Kennedy said. "He's going to hear this." She looked directly into Clayton Hartwell's eyes. Made him see her, made him acknowledge she existed.
If you're trying to make me feel guilty, I don't care if you feel guilty. I doubt you're capable of it. But I want you to understand something. Kennedy's voice was ice now, cold and sharp. That little black girl you didn't even see, the one standing on the porch while you laughed, she grew up, and she made sure you'd remember her name. The system you used to crush people like my family, I just used it to crush you. Clayton's face reddened. This isn't over. We're appealing. We have grounds. Appeal all you want. The verdict stands until you win that appeal, which you won't. Because we have evidence. We have testimony. We have 2,000 families whose lives you destroyed, documented in excruciating detail. Kennedy leaned in closer. But even if you somehow win on appeal, you're done. Your company is dissolved. Your reputation is destroyed. Your name is now synonymous with housing discrimination. Nobody will rent from you. Nobody will work with you. You're finished. You can't do this to me. I already did. And you know what the best part is? Clayton didn't answer. You still don't remember me. You evicted my family, destroyed our lives, and it meant so little to you that you can't even remember our faces. We were that meaningless. Kennedy's voice dropped to a whisper. But I remembered you. I remembered every detail. Your face, your laugh, the way you didn't even look at us like we were human beings. And I spent 23 years making sure that when we met again, you couldn't ignore me. She stepped back. How does it feel, Mr. Hartwell? How does it feel to be powerless? To have someone decide your future without caring about your family or your life or your reasons? Clayton Hartwell opened his mouth, closed it. He had no answer. His lawyers pulled him away, muttering about appeals and legal strategies. Kennedy watched him walk away, watched him leave the courthouse, probably to some mansion in the Hamptons where he could hide from the consequences of his actions. Diane appeared at Kennedy's side. You okay, baby? Yeah, Mama, I'm okay. What did he say? He said it was just business, nothing personal. People like him, they don't see us as people, just numbers on a balance sheet. Well, now he sees me. Now he knows my name. And he's going to spend the rest of his life knowing that the girl he evicted grew up to destroy everything he built. They walked out of the courthouse. Reporters were waiting outside, but Kennedy's security team kept them back. A car was waiting. As they drove away, Kennedy looked back at the courthouse steps. This was supposed to feel better. Winning was supposed to feel like victory, like closure. Instead, Kennedy felt empty, tired. Because the truth was, the verdict didn't give her back her childhood, didn't give back the years her mama spent working herself to death, didn't undo Marcus having to grow up poor because a rich man wanted to make more money. Wait a moment. If this is your first time in Top Core American Storytelling, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful, real-life story from Top Core. Tell us in the comment box the country you're watching it from, and share this video with someone who still believes truth always finds its way. Justice wasn't the same as healing. What are you thinking about? Diane asked. I'm thinking about all the families who didn't get justice, who got evicted and never had the resources to fight back, who lost everything and nobody cared.
You can't save everyone, Kennedy. I know, but I can try to change the system so fewer people need saving. The car pulled up to Diane's apartment. Small, but hers. Kennedy had helped her move there 2 years ago when she finally had enough saved for a security deposit. You want to come up? I'll make dinner. We can celebrate. Kennedy smiled. Yeah, Mama, I'd like that. They went upstairs. Diane made spaghetti, the same meal Kennedy used to make in that one-bedroom apartment in Chicago, sauce from a jar, nothing fancy. But they were together. They were safe. And they'd won. While the pasta boiled, Kennedy's phone rang. Unknown number. This is Kennedy Brooks. Miss Brooks, this is Jonathan Chen. I'm a reporter with the New York Times. I wanted to ask you about what happens next. The verdict was huge, but what about implementation? How do you make sure those families actually...
I'm going to personally oversee every dollar of that settlement, Kennedy said. I'm going to make sure every family affected by Hartwell Properties gets what they're owed. And then I'm going to keep fighting. Because this isn't just about one case. It's about changing how we think about housing in this country. That's ambitious. It has to be. Because right now, in New York City alone, there are probably 100 families getting eviction notices. 100 more 9-year-olds watching their lives get packed into garbage bags. And I'm done accepting that as normal. She hung up. Diane set down 2 plates of spaghetti. They sat at the small kitchen table and ate in comfortable silence. After dinner, Kennedy's phone buzzed again. A text from her assistant at the Attorney General's office. Media requests are flooding in. Everyone wants interviews. What should I tell them? Kennedy typed back, tell them I'll do interviews, but only if they talk about the families, not just me. This isn't about my story. It's about 2,000 families who got justice. Another text came through, this one from Marcus. Saw the verdict on the news. You did it, sis. Dad would be proud. Kennedy smiled, typed back, we did it. You, me, and Mama. Team Brooks. She put her phone down and looked at her mother. What now? Diane asked. Now we make sure every family gets their settlement check. Now we keep fighting. Now we change the system. You're not tired? Kennedy thought about that. About being 9 and becoming a parent, about being 14 and leaving for Exeter, about every sacrifice and every late night and every moment of doubt. I'm exhausted, Mama. I've been tired since I was 9 years old. Then rest. Can't, not while there are still people who need help. Diane reached across the table and took Kennedy's hand. You know what I learned working 2 jobs all those years? You can't pour from an empty cup. You have to take care of yourself before you can take care of others. I will. After what? After you save everyone? After you fix every injustice? Baby, that's not how this works. The fight doesn't end, but you have to rest between rounds. Kennedy squeezed her mama's hand. Maybe she was right. Maybe Kennedy needed to learn when to rest, when to celebrate, when to acknowledge that she'd won something important. But not yet. Because somewhere in New York City, a family was getting an eviction notice right now. A little girl was watching her mother's face turn to stone. A child was learning that the world wasn't fair. And Kennedy had the power to help, had the position, had the resources. She couldn't save everyone, but she could try. That 9-year-old girl on the porch had made a promise, and the promise wasn't finished yet. The checks started going out 6 weeks after the verdict. Kennedy insisted on being involved in every single distribution. Her staff thought she was crazy. 2,000 families meant 2,000 individual cases to review, verify, and process. You're the Deputy Attorney General, her chief of staff said. You have people who can handle this. I know, but I'm doing it anyway. Because Kennedy remembered what it felt like to be on the other side, to be waiting for help that might never come, to feel like you were just a number in a system that didn't care if you lived or died. These families deserve more than just the check in the mail. The Rodriguez family got $23,400. They'd been evicted from their apartment in the Bronx 4 years ago after a sudden 60% rent increase. Mrs. Rodriguez worked as a home health aide. Her husband drove a taxi. They'd ended up in a shelter for 8 months before finding a new place. Kennedy met with them personally, handed Mrs. Rodriguez the check in her office. Is this real? Mrs. Rodriguez asked. Her hands were shaking. Is this actually happening? It's real, and you deserve it. What Hartwell Properties did to you was illegal. This is your compensation." Mrs. Rodriguez started crying. "My daughter, she's been sleeping on my sister's couch for 4 years. Now maybe we can get a place big enough for her to have her own room again." Kennedy watched families like the Rodriguezes come through her office day after day, each one with their own story, their own trauma, their own dreams of what the settlement money could do. Some planned to use it for security deposits on new apartments. Some wanted to pay off debt that had piled up after losing their homes. Some were going to help their kids with college. Every story reminded Kennedy why she'd fought so hard. 3 months after the verdict, it was Diane's turn. Kennedy had saved her mama's case for last, wanted to handle it personally, wanted the moment to mean something. Diane came to the office on a Tuesday afternoon. Kennedy's assistant brought her back, and Kennedy stood when her mama entered. "Have a seat, Mama." Diane sat. She looked nervous. "This feels strange, you being on that side of the desk, me being on this side." "I know, but this is official business. You were harmed by Hartwell Properties. You're entitled to compensation." She slid an envelope across the desk. Diane opened it, looked at the check inside. Her eyes went wide.
"Kennedy, this says $180,000. That's correct. Based on the damages calculation, the years of financial instability, the impact on your children, it's what you're owed." Diane stared at the check like it might disappear if she looked away. "I can buy a house," she whispered. "A real house, with a yard in my name." "Yes, Mama, you can." Diane started crying. Not quiet tears, full sobs that shook her whole body. Kennedy came around the desk and held her mother while she cried. Let her release 23 years of exhaustion and fear and uncertainty. "You did good, baby," Diane said when she could speak again. "You took all that pain and turned it into something that helped people. Your daddy would be so proud." Kennedy felt her own tears coming. "I learned from you, Mama. You're the strongest person I've ever known." "No, I just survived. You transformed." They sat together in Kennedy's office for an hour, talked about what kind of house Diane wanted, where she might want to live, what it would feel like to own something that nobody could take away. When Diane finally left, Kennedy sat alone at her desk and let herself feel the weight of what they'd accomplished. But the work wasn't finished. Kennedy spent the next 6 months implementing new tenant protection policies across New York State, stricter oversight of property management companies, mandatory notice periods before rent increases, legal aid funding for families facing eviction. She testified before the state legislature, pushed for laws that would make it harder for another Clayton Hartwell to destroy families for profit. Some of the laws passed, some didn't, but Kennedy kept fighting. At night, she went home to her apartment in Brooklyn and worked on the cases that wouldn't make headlines. The individual families, still struggling, still fighting landlords, still needing someone with power to care about them. One evening, 6 months after the verdict, Kennedy's assistant knocked on her door. "There's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important. Her name is Jasmine Williams." Kennedy looked up from the brief she was reviewing. "I don't know anyone named Jasmine Williams." "She's 10 years old. Her mother is with her." Kennedy's curiosity won. "Send them in." A young black girl walked into Kennedy's office holding her mother's hand. She wore a school uniform and carried a backpack covered in stickers. "Miss Brooks," the girl said. Her voice was small but determined. "My name is Jasmine. I wrote you a letter, but I wanted to give it to you in person." She held out an envelope. Kennedy took it. "Would you like to sit down?" Jasmine and her mother sat. Kennedy opened the envelope. Inside was a letter written in careful 10-year-old handwriting. "Dear Miss Brooks, my name is Jasmine Williams. I'm in 5th grade. My teacher told us about what you did, how you helped families who lost their homes. My family almost lost our home too. We got an eviction notice and my mom was crying and I didn't know what was going to happen. But then we got money from the settlement. We got to stay. My mom says you're a hero. She says you fought for people like us. I want to be like you when I grow up. I want to help people who don't have anyone to fight for them. Thank you for saving our home. Love, Jasmine. Kennedy read the letter twice, felt something crack open in her chest. She looked at Jasmine sitting there with hope in her eyes, looked at her mother who was trying not to cry. Jasmine, can I ask you something? Yes, ma'am. What do you want to be when you grow up? A lawyer, like you, so I can help people. Kennedy came around the desk and knelt down to Jasmine's level. The same way someone should.
Like we all have to do, every single one of us who makes it out. We have to reach back and pull others up. Jasmine nodded seriously. I will, I promise. Kennedy hugged her, this little girl who reminded her so much of herself. After Jasmine and her mother left, Kennedy sat at her desk and looked at the letter. This was why she'd fought. Not for revenge, not even really for justice in the abstract. For this, for Jasmine. For the next little girl who needed to know that the world could be cruel, but it could also be changed. Kennedy's phone buzzed, a text from Marcus. Turn on Channel 7 News, right now. Kennedy grabbed the remote and turned on the television in her office. A news anchor was speaking. Breaking story tonight. Clayton Hartwell, the real estate mogul who was recently found guilty of housing discrimination, has been arrested on new charges. Federal prosecutors have filed criminal charges, including fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. According to the indictment, Hartwell allegedly operated a scheme to... Kennedy turned up the volume. The screen showed Clayton Hartwell in handcuffs being led out of his apartment building. He looked smaller somehow. Diminished. The news anchor continued. These new charges stemmed from an investigation that began after Hartwell's civil trial. Prosecutors say that evidence uncovered during that trial led them to discover a much larger criminal operation. Kennedy's phone rang. Her boss, the Attorney General. I assume you're watching the news. I am. The federal prosecutors want to talk to you. They're using evidence from your case as foundation for their criminal charges. This could put Hartwell away for 20 years. Kennedy sat back in her chair, watched Clayton being put in the back of an unmarked car. 20 years, she repeated. Maybe more. Kennedy, what you started is bigger than the housing discrimination case. You took down an entire criminal enterprise. After hanging up, Kennedy sat in her office as the sun set over Manhattan. She thought about that 9-year-old girl on the porch, about the promise she'd made while a billionaire laughed. The promise had been about making him see her, making him remember her name. But it had become something bigger, something that mattered more. It had become about making sure the next little girl didn't have to make the same promise. Kennedy looked at Jasmine's letter again, at the careful handwriting, at the hope. Then she picked up her phone and started drafting an email to her team. I want to start a mentorship program, partner with public schools and underserved communities, connect kids interested in law and social justice with lawyers who can guide them. Let's call it the Future Advocates Program. Because this was the real victory. Not Clayton in handcuffs, not the guilty verdict or the settlement money. The real victory was Jasmine, and every kid like her who would grow up knowing that the system could work for them instead of against them. Kennedy sent the email. Then she packed up her briefcase and headed home. Tomorrow, she'd keep fighting, keep working, keep opening doors. But tonight, she let herself believe that the 9-year-old girl on the porch would be proud of who she'd become. Chapter 8. Full Circle. 1 year after the verdict, Kennedy stood in front of East Side Elementary School in Queens. It was a Tuesday morning, cold enough to see her breath, just like that morning on Maple Street 24 years ago. But everything else was different. Kennedy wasn't 9 anymore, wasn't powerless, wasn't invisible. She was 33 years old, Deputy Attorney General of New York, the woman who'd brought down Clayton Hartwell and changed housing law across the state. And today, she was here to announce something that mattered more than any verdict. The Future Advocates Program. Full scholarships for 20 students every year. Kids from low-income families who wanted to study law and social justice. Mentorship from practicing attorneys. Summer internships. Everything Kennedy hadn't.
The school gymnasium was packed, students sitting in neat rows on the floor, parents standing in the back, teachers and administrators in chairs along the sides. Kennedy saw herself in these kids' faces, saw the intelligence, the potential, the dreams that the world would try to convince them were impossible. The principal introduced her, talked about her accomplishments, made her sound like someone from a different world. But Kennedy knew the truth. She was from their world. She just refused to stay there. Kennedy took the microphone. "How many of you have ever felt invisible?" she asked. Slowly, hands went up, more than half the students. "How many of you have been told you can't do something because of where you're from or what you look like?" More hands. "How many of you are angry about that?" Almost every hand in the gymnasium went up. Kennedy smiled. "Good. Hold on to that anger, because anger, when you use it right, is fuel. It's energy. It's power." She walked closer to the students. "When I was 9 years old, my family was evicted from our home. A rich man decided our house was worth more without us in it. So we lost everything. Had to pack our lives into garbage bags and move 600 miles away to live in my aunt's one-bedroom apartment." The gymnasium was completely silent. I was so angry. Angry at that man for laughing while we suffered. Angry at a system that protected people with money and crushed people like my family. Angry at the world for being unfair. She paused. "Let that sink in. But I made a choice. I decided to use that anger to become someone who could change things, someone who could fight back, someone who could make sure the next little girl didn't have to go through what I went through." She pointed to the students. "You all have that same choice. You can let the world's unfairness make you give up, or you can let it make you fight harder, work smarter, become undeniable." A young girl in the front row raised her hand. "Miss Brooks, what if we're not smart enough?" Kennedy knelt down to her level. "You're smart enough. Trust me. I reviewed the applications for this program. Every single one of you is capable of incredible things. The question isn't whether you're smart enough. The question is whether you're brave enough to try." She stood back up. "The Future Advocates Program is offering 20 full scholarships this year. But this isn't just about money. It's about community. It's about having people who believe in you even when you don't believe in yourself." Kennedy pulled out a piece of paper. "I'm going to read you something. It's a letter I received from a 10-year-old girl named Jasmine. She wrote, 'I want to be like you when I grow up. I want to help people who don't have anyone to fight for them.'" Kennedy looked at the students. That's what this program is about, creating a whole generation of people who remember what it's like to need help, who use their success to lift others up, who break cycles instead of continuing them. She paused. "Let that sink in. The man who evicted my family thought I didn't matter, thought I was forgettable, thought people like me would never be powerful enough to challenge people like him." Kennedy smiled. "Last month, he was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. His company is dissolved. His fortune is gone. And me? I'm standing here offering opportunities to kids who remind me of myself. That's not revenge. That's transformation." The gymnasium erupted in applause. After the assembly, Kennedy spent 2 hours talking to students and parents, answering questions about the program, about law school, about how to fight when the system seems designed to keep you down.
A young boy, maybe 11, waited until everyone else had left. "Miss Brooks, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever get tired, like tired of fighting all the time?" Kennedy thought about that question.
About 24 years of being tired, of working when she wanted to rest, of fighting when she wanted to quit. Yes, she said honestly. I get tired all the time. But you know what keeps me going? What? Knowing that if I stop fighting, someone else has to fight twice as hard. And I don't want that for you, or your sister, or any kid who comes after you. The boy nodded. I'm going to apply for your program. Good. I hope you get in. As Kennedy left the school, her phone rang. It was Diane. Hey, Mama. Hey, baby. I'm calling from the new house. The furniture just got delivered. You should come see it. Kennedy smiled. Her mama had bought a small house in Queens. 3 bedrooms, a yard, a place where Marcus could have his own room when he visited from college. I'll come by this weekend. We can christen it properly. I'm so proud of you, Kennedy. Not for the case or the verdict, but for this. For remembering where you came from and helping others get out. After hanging up, Kennedy stood on the sidewalk and looked back at Eastside Elementary. 24 years ago, she'd been a student just like the kids inside that building. Smart but poor. Capable but constrained. Full of potential that the world wanted to waste. Now she was opening doors, creating paths, making sure talent mattered more than money. Her phone buzzed. An email from her assistant. 3 more families reached out about wrongful evictions. Should I set up consultations? Yes, I'll take all 3 cases. Because the work never stopped. There would always be another family facing eviction, another landlord abusing power, another person who needed someone to fight for them. But now Kennedy had something she didn't have at 9 years old. She had position. She had resources. She had a team of lawyers who believed in the work. And she had proof that change was possible. Kennedy walked to the subway, rode the train to Manhattan, went back to her office and worked until 8 p.m. on the new cases. When she finally got home, she found a package waiting at her door. Inside was a framed photo. Kennedy at 9 years old, standing in front of the house on Maple Street. Diane must have found it while packing up her old apartment. Kennedy hung the photo on her wall, looked at that little girl who'd made a promise on a porch while a billionaire laughed. We did it, she said to the photo. We kept the promise. But more than that, she'd transformed it. The promise had started as revenge, as making one man pay for his cruelty. It had become about justice, about changing systems, about making sure the next generation had it easier. Kennedy's phone buzzed one last time. A text from Jasmine's mother. Jasmine got accepted to the gifted program at her school. She says it's because you inspired her to try. Thank you for giving her hope. Kennedy read the message twice. This was the real victory. Not Clayton in prison. Not the settlement money. Not even the new laws. The victory was Jasmine. And the 20 kids who'd get scholarships this year, and every person who would benefit from the changes Kennedy was making to the system. The little girl who was evicted had become the woman who protected others from eviction. The child who was powerless had become the adult with power. And she was using that power exactly the way it should be used. To open doors. To break cycles. To make sure that being poor didn't mean being powerless.
Because that little girl's rage had become this woman's purpose. And the work was just beginning. Kennedy Brooks was 9 years old when a billionaire laughed while her family lost everything. She was 33 when that same billionaire went to prison for 18 years. But this story isn't really about revenge. It's about a little girl who refused to stay powerless, about a mother who worked 2 jobs and never quit, about transforming pain into purpose and rage into justice. If this story moved you, I need you to do something right now. Hit that like button, because that tells me you want more stories like this. Real stories about real people who refuse to accept the world's cruelty as permanent. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you or someone you love ever faced eviction? What would you do with the power Kennedy gained?
Do you believe one person can actually change the system? I read every single comment. Your voice matters here. And if you're new to Top Core, let me tell you what we do. We don't tell fairy tales. We tell the truth, the uncomfortable truth about how America really works, about racism, classism, and the systems designed to keep certain people down. But we also tell stories about people who fight back, who climb out, who transform their trauma into tools for change. Hit that subscribe button right now, because next week I'm bringing you a story that's going to shake you to your core. It's about a black janitor who overheard something in a corporate bathroom that exposed a conspiracy reaching the highest levels of government. What he did with that information cost him everything, but saved thousands of lives. You won't want to miss it. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Share it with the single parent working multiple jobs, wondering if the sacrifice is worth it. Share it with the kid who's being told their dreams are too big for someone from their neighborhood. Share it with anyone who's ever been made to feel invisible, powerless, or forgettable.